The world as we knew it was never the same after the Black Ship arrived. It wasn't just another discovery, another anomaly to investigate. It was a warning, a beacon of something far more terrifying than humanity had ever imagined. It had drifted into our solar system, an ancient, silent vessel, its origins unknown. For years, humanity studied the ship, assuming it was just a relic from some forgotten alien civilization. But they were wrong. What they didn't realize was that the Black Ship had come with a message not just for the human race, but for something far more sinister, something that had been watching us from the shadows. The ship's presence was a catalyst, triggering a chain of events no one was prepared for. Within its hollow, metallic depths, humanity found clues, fragments of ancient languages, symbols that made no sense, and cryptic messages encoded in the ship's data core. But as the data began to surface, it became clear this was no ordinary vessel. It was a warning, a desperate cry from a civilization long gone, but not forgotten. The ship's arrival was the first sign, the herald of an invasion humanity had no hope of stopping. Among those who uncovered the Black Ship's secrets was a man who was no longer just a person, but a part of something far greater than himself. Once just an ordinary man, he was now changed, transformed by the ship's enigmatic power, altered by the very essence of its mysterious technology. He understood things now, things that couldn't be explained, things that were too dangerous to comprehend. With each passing day, he felt the weight of his new role, the burden of knowledge that threatened to consume him. And now, he was reaching out, sending cryptic messages back to Earth, messages that spoke of things humanity couldn't yet understand. The messages were warnings, but they were also something more. A plea for help, an invitation to join something greater, something that could potentially save us all or destroy everything we held dear. The man knew that the ship was not merely a warning. It was the beginning of something far worse. The Black Ship had awakened something that had been lying dormant, waiting, watching. An unseen alien force, drawn by the ship's presence, was now heading toward us, its intentions unknown, its power unimaginable. The man's warnings were scattered, his messages fragmented, cryptic. But one thing was clear, Earth had no idea what was coming. The alien force, silent and invisible, was already on its way, moving closer with every passing moment. Its path was clear, its destination set. And it was drawn to the Black Ship, just as humanity had been. But unlike humanity, this force understood the true purpose of the vessel. It knew what the ship had brought, and it wasn't here for peace. As the man sent his final message, a plea for the people of Earth to prepare for what was coming, he felt the pull of something darker. The ship had changed him, altered him in ways he couldn't explain. And as he looked out into the vast expanse of space, he realized that the Black Ship had brought him into the center of something far bigger than anything he could have ever imagined. And then, it happened. In the distance, on the edge of the solar system, the first signs of the alien force began to appear. It was subtle at first, just a faint ripple in the fabric of space, a distortion that only the most sensitive sensors could detect. But as it grew closer, the distortion became more pronounced. The force was real. And it was coming. Fast. The man could feel the ship pulsing, its energy growing stronger, as if it was reacting to the approaching force. It was no longer just a vessel, it was alive, and it was calling out. But what was it calling to? What was it trying to communicate? And why had it chosen him to be its messenger? As the tension mounted and the shadows of the unseen force stretched ever closer, the man's thoughts turned to Earth. To the people who had no idea what was about to descend upon them. To the world that had once been so simple, so predictable. To the future that was now uncertain, teetering on the edge of something far darker than any of them could ever imagine. But before he could send another warning, before he could reveal the truth, the ship's systems began to malfunction. The lights flickered, and the room grew colder. The hum of the engines grew louder, more erratic, as if the ship was struggling against something, a force far greater than itself. The man's hand shook as he typed the final message, the urgency of it burning in his chest. They're coming. But was it too late? But what would happen next? Would humanity be ready? Or would they fall prey to the unseen horrors that now stalked the stars? In the silence of space, the only sound was the hum of the black ship as it waited for its destiny to unfold. And with it, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. What was coming next would change everything. The question was, would anyone survive to see it? The ship groaned, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to echo from the very core of its metal body. It was a sound like no other, something ancient, something alive. The man, now bound to the black ship in ways he couldn't begin to comprehend, stood motionless, his hand still resting on the console, his mind racing. He had felt it before the shift, the tremor in the air, the sensation that something was approaching, something immense, something that wasn't bound by the laws of space and time. But now, it was here. Closer than ever. The messages he had sent, frantic, broken, desperate, had barely scratched the surface. His cryptic warnings, those final words, "they're coming." He could only hope they would reach someone in time. But deep down, he knew that the time for escape had passed. The unseen force had already taken notice. And it was no longer just watching. It was hunting. He turned away from the console, his eyes scanning the chamber around him. The walls of the ship seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, faint symbols flickering in and out of existence, like whispers from another era, another world. What were they trying to tell him? What were they trying to show him? He had seen them all before, these symbols, but they never made sense. They felt familiar, but distant, like fragments of a forgotten dream, a dream that had slipped from his grasp the moment he woke up. The ship had chosen him, or perhaps he had chosen it. Either way, there was no turning back now. He wasn't just human anymore. The ship had changed him, and it was changing him still. It was as though his very soul had been rewritten, altered by the dark energy pulsing through its veins. The strange connection between him and the ship was undeniable, an unspoken bond that went beyond technology or science. It was something older, something far more dangerous. The black ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a weapon, a tool of something far greater. A warning, yes, but a warning about what? Who would it warn, and against what? The answers were buried within the ship, hidden beneath layers of technology that no human mind had ever been meant to comprehend. But now, those secrets were slowly starting to reveal themselves, and he was the one meant to unlock them. Whether he wanted to or not. Outside, the silent darkness of space stretched infinitely, indifferent to the fate of those aboard the ship. But the man could feel it now, the pressure of the unseen force closing in. The distortion in space was growing stronger, shifting in ways that defied logic. The ship's sensors were blinking erratically, flashing warnings, but there was nothing to be seen. Nothing, except for the deep, growing sense of dread that hung in the air like a storm on the horizon. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't wait for whatever was coming. He needed to find answers, and fast. His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The black ship had been the key, but to what? The alien force that had been drawn to it, what was it? What did it want? The messages he had uncovered were nothing more than fragments, pieces of a larger picture, and the more he uncovered, the more questions seemed to arise. He pulled up the data again, analyzing the fragments of the ancient language etched into the walls, the symbols that had once seemed so meaningless. Now, they whispered to him in ways they never had before, their meanings slowly beginning to take shape. A part of him didn't want to understand. But it was too late. The ship's power began to surge again, and the man felt a shiver crawl down his spine. Something was happening to him. The connection to the ship was becoming more intense, more visceral. His heartbeat quickened, and the world around him seemed to blur, as though the very fabric of reality was beginning to stretch. He gripped the console, trying to steady himself. The room spun, and for a moment, he was no longer in the ship. He was floating in the black void of space, weightless, alone, surrounded by an oppressive silence. Then, a voice. Soft at first, barely audible. It wasn't his own. It was the ship speaking to him, or perhaps it was something else. The voice seemed to seep into his mind, threading its way through his thoughts, like a whisper that echoed from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. "We are coming." The word sent a shiver through him, the meaning of them sinking in with a chilling finality. The ship wasn't just warning him. It was part of something much larger, something that had been waiting. Watching. The unseen force was not some alien race, not some invader from another world. It was something more insidious, something far older. The ship had come to Earth not just as a warning, but as a harbinger, a signal that the time had come. The man staggered back from the console, his breath coming in short gasps. He had to get out of there. He had to warn someone. But who could he warn? The world was too caught up in their own lives, their own problems. No one would believe him. They hadn't believed him when he first discovered the ship, when he first realized what it was. They still didn't believe. As he stumbled down the dimly lit corridors of the black ship, the walls seemed to close in on him, the air growing thicker, more oppressive. It was as though the ship was alive, breathing, reacting to his every movement. The deeper he went, the more the ship seemed to change, shifting around him in ways that defied understanding. The symbols on the walls were everywhere now, glowing faintly, pulsing with an energy that made his skin crawl. He had to get to the control room. That was where he might find answers, real answers. But with every step, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, grew stronger. It was as if the ship itself was aware of his every move, anticipating his next action. Then, the lights flickered. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder, more erratic, as if something was interfering with them. The man's heart pounded in his chest as he quickened his pace. He could hear something now, faint at first, like a distant whisper, but growing louder. It was not the voice of the ship. It was something else. Something alien. He rounded a corner, and for a split second, he thought he saw something moving in the shadows, just beyond his reach. His breath caught in his throat. It was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, its shape distorted by the darkness. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanishing into the depths of the ship. He stood frozen, his mind racing. What was that? What had he seen? It wasn't human. It wasn't anything he recognized. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and suddenly, the ship's sensors blared to life. Warning! 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 The distortion in space had reached its peak. He could feel the pressure building, the atmosphere inside the ship growing more oppressive by the second. The unseen force was here. It was in the ship with him, hunting him. And now, the ship itself seemed to be fighting back, as if it knew the threat was coming. The man broke into a run, his footfalls echoing through the ship's hollow halls. He had to reach the control room. He had to find a way to stop this, to fight back. But as he turned another corner, the lights went out completely. In the darkness, he heard it. A soft, slithering sound, moving toward him. And then silence. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in from all sides, thicker than any shadow he had ever known. His breath came in ragged gasps, his pulse pounding in his ears as he stood frozen, unable to move. The slithering sound was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that hung heavy in the air. His eyes strained to adjust, to find any shape in the impenetrable blackness, but the longer he stood there, the more he felt someone watching him. The presence was palpable, thick with malevolent intent. Suddenly, the ship's lights flickered back on, bathing the corridor in harsh, cold light. For a split second, he thought he saw someone moving in the shadows ahead. A figure, not human, not even remotely human. Its limbs were long, impossibly thin, and its face. Its face was a mask of nothingness, an empty void where eyes should have been. The skin, or what passed for skin, was translucent, a dark, shifting substance that seemed to absorb the light around it. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. He wasn't alone. The man's heart hammered in his chest as he turned on his heel, nearly stumbling over his own feet as he sprinted toward the control room. His mind was spinning, struggling to grasp what was happening. What was in the ship with him? Was this part of the unseen force he had felt approaching, or something far worse, a remnant of the ship's dark past? Whatever it wasn't something he could ignore. It wasn't a figment of his imagination. The terror he felt was real. It was a force he couldn't outrun, couldn't escape. As he raced down the narrow hallway, a sudden crash sounded behind him. He didn't dare look back. He couldn't afford to waste any time. But the footsteps, slow, deliberate, growing louder, told him everything he needed to know. It was coming for him. The thing, whatever it was tracking him, stalking him. The man's thoughts raced. There was no escape. He could feel it, the oppressive weight of something terrible closing in. And then, in the midst of his panic, something else struck him, a memory, a piece of the puzzle he had almost forgotten. The messages. The cryptic warnings he had received from the Black Ship. They're coming. But who was coming? The alien force? Or something even more ancient, more dangerous? He rounded another corner, his hands shaking as he reached for the control panel. But as his fingers touched the cold surface, the lights flickered once more, and the room seemed to shift. The floor beneath him groaned, as though the ship itself was groaning under the strain of something vast and incomprehensible. His fingers slipped from the panel, and he took a step back, fear crawling up his spine. The room wasn't what it seemed. It was different. The layout was wrong. The walls, once sterile, metallic, were now covered in strange symbols, alien markings that seemed to glow with an eerie light. He blinked, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. This wasn't possible. The ship's layout had been studied, mapped out for years. There was no way this was happening. But here it was, before him, a twisted version of the control room. A room that didn't belong in this reality. The man's mind reeled, a thought creeping in the back of his mind. What if the ship had been something else before it became the Black Ship? Something older, far older than anything humanity could imagine. What if the ship wasn't just a vessel from another civilization, but a gateway, a doorway into something darker, something beyond comprehension? Before he could fully process this thought, the sound of a voice echoed through the room. Not a human voice. No, this was different. It was distorted, guttural, almost inhuman. A language he couldn't understand, but one that felt ancient. The voice vibrated through his chest, filling his bones with an unnatural cold. It was calling to him. And then, in a flash, he understood. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a prison. A containment unit for something far worse than he had realized. The alien force that had been drawn to the ship wasn't just seeking it, it had been waiting for it. Waiting for the ship to return to its rightful place. And now, the ship was calling out to it, summoning it. He stumbled back, his head spinning. His fingers scrambled for the console once again, desperately trying to make sense of the readings that were now flashing before him. The screen flickered, showing strange coordinates, a location somewhere far beyond the reaches of the known universe. But the coordinates weren't what terrified him. It was the message that appeared just below them, written in the same cryptic symbols he had seen before. The symbols were no longer a mystery. The gate opens. Suddenly, the ship jolted, a violent shudder that shook the entire structure. The walls groaned, the lights flickered once more, and the ship's engines hummed to life. But this wasn't a hum of power. It was something darker, something more sinister. The ship was awakening. Not just as a vessel, but as a tool for something far older, far more dangerous. The man turned to face the door, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The presence was there again, closer now, a weight pressing down on him from every direction. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it. The thing was here. It had been here all along, waiting for this moment. And now that it had come, there would be no escaping it. The slithering sound returned, this time louder, closer. He could hear it, right outside the door. It was moving in the shadows, just out of his line of sight. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. He had no escape. No way out. And then the voice spoke again, but this time, it wasn't a distant whisper. It was clear. It was close. The language was incomprehensible, but the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't just a warning. This was a command. A call for something, someone, to answer. The door to the control room exploded open, and in the instant before the man could react, he was face to face with it. The creature or whatever it was loomed in the doorway, its eyes or what passed for eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. It was taller than any man, its body long and spindly, its skin a shifting mass of darkness, as if it were made of the very shadows itself. And then, with a single motion, it reached out. The man barely had time to scream before everything went black. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all directions. The man's body lay motionless on the cold, metallic floor of the control room, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He felt disoriented, detached from his surroundings as though he were floating in a dream, no, a nightmare. His head ached, his body was heavy, but his mind screamed for clarity. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, his fingers digging into the ground as he fought against the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to pull him under. His eyes flickered open, and the world around him was a blur, the walls of the ship still trembling as if the very structure itself was alive. His hand shook as he reached up to touch his face, finding it wet with sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't alone. He could still feel its presence, hovering just out of reach. The creature, the being that had stalked him, hunted him through the ship, was still here, waiting. But something was different now. The air was still. Too still. The lights flickered back on, harsh and sterile, bathing the room in an unyielding glow. But it wasn't the normal ship lights. These were distorted, warped, as though the ship itself was trying to force its own reality into something else. The symbols on the walls pulsed with an eerie glow, swirling in patterns that seemed to change every time he blinked. It was as though the ship was trying to tell him something, or maybe it was trying to show him something far worse. The air was thick, the pressure mounting, and then he heard it again, the voice, but now it wasn't a whisper. It was loud, commanding, vibrating through his very bones. You have awakened it. The man's heart skipped a beat. It was no longer a question of survival. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore, he was fighting to contain something ancient, something far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The ship, the Black Ship, wasn't just a warning. It was a trap. A trap for the creature that had been bound to it, a being that had been sealed away for millennia, waiting for the right moment, the right vessel, to set it free. And that moment was now. The creature was no longer outside the control room. It was inside. It was everywhere. The shadows twisted and writhed, coalescing into a shape, an outline, that grew more defined with every passing second. Its presence was suffocating, the very air around it charged with an unbearable weight. The man's breath caught in his throat, his muscles locking in place as he watched it emerge from the shadows. It was no longer just a form of darkness, but a being tall, impossibly thin, its body seemingly made of the very void that surrounded them. Its face, if you could even call it a face, was an empty, shifting mask, the features ever-changing, a chaotic blend of eyes and mouths and things that didn't belong in the realm of human comprehension. Its arms were long, ending in claws that scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. The man knew, in that moment, that there was no escaping. The creature had already claimed the ship as its own. But what did it want? What was its purpose? Why had it been locked away in the first place? And more importantly, why had it chosen now to escape? It spoke again, its voice a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the ship. We are not alone. The word struck him like a physical blow. The ship was a doorway, but a doorway to what? To who? He had assumed the force that had been drawn to the Black Ship was alien, but what if that wasn't the case? What if the creature wasn't from another world at all, but something from the deepest recesses of humanity's forgotten history, something far older, far more dangerous than anything they could comprehend? The creature took another step forward, and the man scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. His body screamed in protest, but instinct drove him onward. He had to stop it. He had to find a way to contain it before it reached Earth, before it could destroy everything. As he stumbled toward the console, trying to reassert control over the ship's systems, something incredible happened. The walls of the room began to shift, the symbols twisting and rearranging themselves into a new pattern, one that he had never seen before. It was the same alien language, but now it made sense. The symbols formed words, and the words, once cryptic and meaningless, now screamed a warning. It is not the vessel you must fear. The man froze, the realization crashing into him like a wave. The black ship wasn't just a trap for the creature, it was a prison for the ship itself. The true enemy wasn't the creature that had hunted him, it wasn't even the alien force that had been drawn to the ship. It was the ship, the black ship, and whatever had built it. His blood ran cold. The ship, a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power, had been meant to contain something far worse than the creature it had once held captive. And now, it was free. The creature, the alien force, and the ship were all part of the same puzzle, a puzzle that was unraveling before him, right before his eyes. The creature lunged, its claws scraping against the metal floor as it moved toward him with blinding speed. In that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The man reached for the only thing he could, a small, unassuming device attached to the side of the console. He didn't know if it would work, but it was his only chance. He slammed his hand down on the device, and in an instant, the ship shook violently, its engines roaring to life with an intensity that made the walls creak. The creature screamed in fury as the ship's systems began to overheat, the entire structure trembling under the strain. But the man didn't hesitate. He couldn't. The ship was activating, and the pressure was building to a breaking point. Then, without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted from the control panel, filling the room with a searing white glow. The man shielded his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest, as the sound of the ship's engines reached a deafening crescendo. But in the midst of the chaos, something else happened. The creature, its form flickering in and out of existence, began to dissipate, as if the ship was rejecting it, tearing it apart at the molecular level. The man couldn't believe his eyes. He had done it. He had activated the failsafe. The ship was rejecting the creature, expelling it from its core. But just as the creature's form began to unravel, the man caught a glimpse of something else, something far worse. In the center of the room, beneath the control panel, a new set of symbols began to glow, more intense than ever. And within them, a face that was not human, not alien, but something ancient, something that should have remained forgotten. The black ship had always been a prison. But the question was, what had it been built to contain, and who was the true prisoner? The blinding light from the control panel began to dim, the glow flickering like a dying star, but the air was thick with tension. The creature's form, once solid and terrifying, had been reduced to little more than tendrils of shadow, writhing in agony as the ship's systems fought to expel it. But as the light faded and the ship groaned under the strain, the man couldn't help but feel an unsettling calm. The creature was not gone. It had merely been contained for now. He stumbled back, his hands shaking, his chest still heaving with the adrenaline of the moment. The ship felt like it was on the brink of collapse, every metal beam groaning, every wire humming with an ominous energy. The lights dimmed again, flickering in a disorienting strobe, casting the room in a pale, sickly glow. It was clear that the ship had been irrevocably changed, its systems altered by whatever had transpired. He wasn't sure if the black ship could even function as it had before. In fact, he wasn't sure how much of the ship was even real anymore. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as if the vessel itself had become part of something greater. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle that had become his life over the past days, no, weeks. The black ship was never just a vessel, it was a key. And the creature, it was more than just an alien force, more than an ancient being trapped in a forgotten ship. The creature had been a guardian, but not in the way he had assumed. It had been guarding something far worse than itself. It had been guarding the ship. The face beneath the symbols had been a warning, an echo of the beings who had created the Black Ship. The ship, and its twisted technology, had been designed not to contain a threat but to imprison something far more dangerous. The Black Ship was not just a prison, it was a trap, a tool in a much larger game, a weapon hidden in the void, waiting for the right moment to be used. But what was the weapon? And who, or what, had created it? The man shook his head, trying to focus. The answers weren't coming, not yet. He still had one task left: to survive. And to get out. The ship lurched again, a violent jolt that sent him sprawling to the floor. A low rumble filled the air, growing louder by the second. His heart raced as the lights flickered and the temperature dropped, the chill settling deep into his bones. The ship was malfunctioning. The systems were going offline one by one, and the once controlled environment had begun to spiral out of control. He pushed himself up, the urgency of the moment striking him like a punch to the gut. He had to leave. If he stayed, he would be consumed by the chaos that was unfolding around him. The ship had to be abandoned. If he didn't, there was no telling what kind of destruction it could unleash on Earth, on humanity. His eyes fell on the doorway, the faint outline of a hallway stretching out into the unknown. The creature, or what was left of it, was still out there, waiting in the shadows. He could feel its presence stronger now, but restrained, perhaps trapped within the failing systems of the ship. For now, he would have to leave it behind. There was no time to waste. He made his way down the hallway, every step echoing in the silent, decaying ship. The walls seemed to close in on him, the air thick with an unnatural weight. He glanced over his shoulder, nothing. The creature hadn't followed. Yet. The exit, the escape pod, was at the far end of the ship. It was a one-way ticket, but it was the only chance he had left. As he neared the pod, he hesitated for a brief moment. He had been so focused on surviving, on escaping, that he hadn't stopped to consider the consequences. What had the Black Ship unleashed on the world? What had he uncovered, and was it too late to stop it? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: the Black Ship was only a piece of a much larger puzzle. And whatever that larger puzzle was, it was still out there. It was still coming. He strapped himself into the pod, his fingers shaking as he initiated the launch sequence. The countdown began, the familiar hum of the pod's engine starting to life, but even as he secured himself in place, the feeling of unease gnawed at him. What had he really escaped? The ship may have been lost, but what about the force that had been drawn to it? The alien presence that had followed him here, that had been waiting for him to unlock the ship's deepest secrets. The pod shot away from the Black Ship with a jolt, the ship's massive form growing smaller in the distance. The image of the Black Ship receded, but something inside him told him this was far from over. He looked out through the small viewport, his eyes scanning the stars that stretched out before him. But just as the pod accelerated away, a new light appeared in the distance, far off at first, just a flicker of something foreign. His eyes narrowed as he focused on it, his heart skipping a beat as the light grew brighter, larger. It was no ordinary star. No, it was something far more unnatural. Something that shouldn't be there. The ship, no, the fleet had arrived. The alien force that had been drawn to the Black Ship, to the chaos that it had wrought, was now in full view. It wasn't just a singular presence, as he had once feared. It was an entire fleet, a swarm of massive ships that stretched across the stars like an army preparing to descend on an unsuspecting world. The man's breath caught in his throat as the pod shook once again, this time not from the failing Black Ship, but from the force of the approaching fleet. The sound, a low hum that resonated deep in his bones, was the harbinger of something far worse than he could have imagined. His fingers tightened around the controls. There was no escaping now. The pod wasn't equipped to fight off a fleet, not even close. And even if he made it back to Earth, what would he bring with him? What kind of hell had been unleashed? But then, in the distance, he saw it, a flash of light, bright and brilliant, cutting through the darkened expanse. For a split second, he thought it was the black ship, somehow surviving, but then he realized with a chill that it was something else. A new ship, a new force, one that was coming straight for the alien fleet. In that moment, he knew what he had to do. He had to warn humanity. He had to get back to Earth. The black ship had been the warning, but the true battle, the true war was just beginning. The pod veered into a steep angle as he initiated a course toward Earth, his heart racing, his mind spinning. He couldn't let the fleet reach Earth. He couldn't let them win. But the question was no longer if they would reach Earth. It was when. And if humanity would be ready for what was to come. The pod's engine roared to life, and as he pushed forward, the distance between him and the approaching fleet closed, but so too did the distance between Earth and the unknown. The universe was watching.